Now I'm going to talk about the three important agreements that you need to think about and create on your path to getting serious about raising capital. But like we said before, by this point, you're already getting people into your syndicate. You're building that conversation. You're building your investor club. You're talking about, your vision and how you're going to do that. And some people who are more serious, you might be starting to look at your story and numbers. And then, a real serious investor is going to want to learn what are your, what business agreements do you have in place? And that includes any kind of outside agreements, but the real most important ones are your internal agreements. And, I've mentored a lot of people with partnerships. I've blown up my own partnerships. These three agreements will save you, even if you never raise capital. Let's just say you want to have maybe you and your friend want to go into business. And I've said, so, well, we're just 50-50. And it doesn't work. It doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because a real business has three different agreements. One is the ownership. And ownership is determined by what you put in at the start. So let's say you've got two friends and you just say, well, we'll be 50-50. But then some guy says, well, I'll put in $10,000 and maybe the other one doesn't have 10,000, or even if they do. And then also these partners, they think, well, and then we're friends and we're going to all just, divide up the labor. But invariably one gets sick, right? This other friend, his business partner turned out he was an alcoholic. And now you've got this 50-50 ownership and one person isn't doing any work, but they want to get the profit and the benefit of being the owner of this company. So let's start with ownership. Ownership is decided by what you put in advance. It's not stock options. You don't give away shares of stock to other people for anything that is intangible or that's going to be delivered in the future. It's a now snapshot. So let's say you've got you and your buddy, and you put in 50,000 and your buddy puts in 20. So let's use a better number. You put in 70, they put in 30. You own 70% of the company. They own 30. That's it. You don't give them more because they're a nice guy. Now, maybe they bring some asset. Maybe they say, well, look, I've got an email list of 10,000 people. Now that's an asset. So now they're putting in $30,000 worth of cash. You agree on a value of that asset. That asset becomes the property of the whole enterprise. Maybe that is worth $10,000. And so now you've got a 40-70 split. And that's ownership. And we can get into more details, but you want to look at each asset a person is bringing, not their future labor. That's going to be handled in the labor contract. So next is the governance agreement. And you want to have a set of protocols about how you're going to settle disagreements. And, these can be very tricky. We're not going to go into a whole lot of detail. You could probably Google and get some sense of how partners should agree. And so it's governance. And what is governance for? Well, what happens if one of you gets hit by a bus? And, who's going to make the decisions? How it's really the flow of decisions. And the reason that big corporations have board of directors is like if there's some crisis with the CEO, then the board gets together and they've got their governance agreement, and then they use that governance agreement to govern the company. So the CEO is the employee of the company. And that's why you need your employee agreement. So maybe you start out and it's like, okay, one guy is going to be the marketing guy and the other guy is going to be product development. And what you do is you assign a salary for each of those roles. And maybe the company doesn't have any money, so to the extent that the person is doing their work, they would maybe be accumulating salary, which would convert to equity later. And then, but suppose one person wants to quit. Let's say the person that put in $70,000 says, you know what, I don't want to work anymore. Like maybe the company's making money, they're getting paid, they want to quit. Well, then their salary would be reserved to go to somebody that they hire to replace that person. Maybe maybe you're hiring a manager, but you still retain your equity. You still retain your ownership. You may even still retain your governorship. So those three agreements are essential. And even if you're starting a one-person company, it's really important because that you establish your equity contribution to the company at the beginning. Maybe you're going to give your idea, maybe it's $1 million idea, and you value that at $1 million. And if you can get your other investors to agree to that, then okay, ideas are really worth something. I know that because I've sold a lot of them. It's not that easy, but if you can sell an idea, you can sell just about anything. So you've got your ownership agreement. And why that's important, because let's say you're going to raise capital. Now you're starting to develop what's called your capitalization table. It's like, well, I own $1 million. I'm declaring myself to bring $1 million worth of equity to the table just because of who I am, my ideas, and whatever development I've worked and whatever money I've put in the company so far. And then somebody says, well, okay, and then I'm going to bring another, I'm going to bring $100,000. So now you've got this equation. Your $1 million plus their $100,000, that equals $1.1 million. And they own a little less than 10% of the whole company. And so this, without these conversations, partnerships crash and burn. I've seen it so many times. Again, I've done it myself a few times. Because why? Because I didn't go to Harvard Business School to learn all this stuff. And a lot of this stuff isn't even taught there at a level that relates to, real startups. There's not really a real school for startups that I know of where you go to college and learn how to start something up. I mean, I think I want to demystify that because I got bigger fish to fry. I'm a vegan, sorry, but I still use those old terms. I got to say that. Sorry. I've got my eye on something bigger, which is to help you and hundreds and even thousands of people succeed in building the kinds of companies we're going to need in this new era where, AI replaces a lot of labor. What do we have to do? Well, we've got oceans to clean up. We've got forests to restore. We have to redesign the entire agriculture system of the whole planet. So there's plenty of work. There's plenty of stuff to be done that, is not going to get handled directly by AI today. It's going to, we kind of need to get back and repair the global infrastructure and the healthcare society, trillions of dollars of opportunity. So I don't want you wasting time failing on your partnership. And even if all you want to do is have a food truck and you've got one partner, it's like, just do it right. It's so much more fun. So again, I probably repeated this 3 times, but it's so important, it's worth repeating 100 times. Your ownership agreement, what did you put in? What's the value of that? Then governance, who decides the rules? It's not always necessarily based on pure ownership, but in general, the person with the majority of equity ownership also dominates the governance. And that's important in the beginning. You don't want to get some giant board telling you what to do when the company's barely making any money. You want people to pay you to be in charge and to control the whole thing. And if you get enough money in, you might consider taking out something called key man insurance. So there's some risk mitigation for the investors. But for the most part, it's high risk. You're trying to do as little in the way of paperwork as possible. Ownership agreement, governance, and then your labor agreement. You say, okay, now I'm designing my one-man company or my two-man or my three-man company, and here's my role. Here's the salary we're assigning to that role, and as long as I'm performing the work according to my labor contract, they might talk about how many hours you have to work or what kind of results you're going to produce over the next 6 months. And then you get evaluated. You can evaluate yourself if you're a one-person company, or you and your team get together. That's part of the governance. It's like, okay, did you do a good job? Should you stay in that role? And just again, to repeat, let's say that something happens, you want to quit. You don't lose your equity. You replace you with another laborer to do the labor part of your agreement. So those 3 agreements, when you're kind of hitting your pace, you know, and you see that you're building your syndicate and that people are gathering around your idea, then it's time to get that stuff done. And that's also your securities lawyer might have some expertise in these agreements to help make, you know, help you avoid making mistakes. Again, at the early stage, they don't have to be that fancy, but again, most people starting companies, they never think about that stuff and then they just flounder. And I just hate to see, I've seen so many beautiful companies fail because they don't understand what I've been teaching in this series. So I think that's plenty for this video. Thanks for listening. And of course, if you want to get started, book a 15-minute call with me in the link in the show notes.